The morning sun spilled gold across the rolling lawns of the Morris estate, catching on the chrome fenders of luxury cars parked by the fountain. The air smelled of roses and ocean breeze drifting up from the Pacific. Inside, soft classical music floated through the marble halls, a soundtrack to another serene day in the home of Jeffrey and Janet Morris. Jeffrey Morris, founder of Morris Energy Group, had built his empire on oil, pipelines, refineries, and solar fields that powered half the West Coast. The mansion was his crown jewel, a sprawling sanctuary of glass and stone that overlooked Beverly Hills. Yet for all its grandeur, what Jeffrey valued most was peace. The quiet laughter of his 3-year-old son, Noah, echoing down the hallway every morning. And no one seemed to adore Noah more than Elsie Peterson, their maid. Elsie had joined the Morris household nearly 2 years ago. Janet had met her through a local church charity for single women looking for work. She remembered Elsie's gentle voice, her lowered eyes, and the way she said, "I just want to serve and be useful." That humility had touched Janet's heart. Within a week, she offered Elsie a full-time position with free accommodation in the mansion's staff quarters. Elsie proved efficient, polite, and punctual. She rarely complained, kept to herself, and treated the Morrises with respect. Janet would often tell friends, "Elsie's like family now. She's the one person I can completely trust with Noah." And for a while that was true. On that particular morning, Janet was in the kitchen, helping Mrs. Turner, their elderly cook, arrange a tray of breakfast pastries for Jeffrey. Sunlight glimmered on the silver tray as Mrs. Turner glanced toward the living room, lowering her voice. "Ma'am, I don't mean to intrude," she said softly. "But have you noticed how often Noah cries when you're not around?" Janet smiled dismissively. "He's just at that age, Mrs. Turner. Toddlers cry for everything. Hunger, attention, a toy out of reach." Mrs. Turner hesitated, wringing her apron. "Maybe so. But yesterday, after you left, I heard him wail like he was frightened. I went up, and Elsie said she was teaching him discipline. I didn't see what happened, but..." Her voice trailed off, uneasy. Janet's brow furrowed slightly. "Elsie, teaching discipline." She shook her head with a small laugh. "That girl's barely 26. She's sweet, not strict. You must have misunderstood." Mrs. Turner wanted to press further, but one look at Janet's trusting eyes told her it was useless. "Yes, ma'am," she murmured, turning back to the pastries. Upstairs, Elsie hummed a soft tune as she folded laundry. Her movements were sharp, efficient, almost mechanical. In the nursery, Noah sat on the floor, stacking colorful blocks and giggling at his own creation. The moment his tower collapsed, he clapped his hands and started to rebuild. "Quiet down, Noah," Elsie said flatly, her voice losing its melody. He looked up, blinking, and reached for another block. "I said quiet." The words came harder this time, slicing through the stillness. She turned and looked at the boy, his chubby cheeks, bright blue eyes, and a smile that seemed to mock her somehow. "A life so perfect he doesn't even know pain," she thought bitterly. The bitterness came uninvited, as it often did. Her mind flickered back to her small apartment in Compton, to the single metal fan that barely turned, to the smell of spilled formula and fever. Her baby, her Micah, had died before he was 1. She had been scrubbing floors at a rich family's home that day, smiling politely while her son coughed himself into silence miles away. The memory crawled into her chest and tightened it like a fist. A sharp crash snapped her back. Noah had dropped a toy truck, startled by the sound of her ragged breathing. "Look what you did," Elsie hissed. "You can't even sit quietly." She snatched the truck, tossing it aside. Her voice trembled with anger she didn't understand. "You spoiled little." She stopped herself, closing her eyes. A deep breath. A trembling smile. Then the faint sound of footsteps in the hall. Instantly, her face changed. She knelt beside Noah and began to sing softly again, an old lullaby from her childhood. By the time Janet peeked in through the door, she was rocking the boy gently in her arms. "There's my 2 favorite people," Janet said warmly. "Elsie, I swear, you have a magic touch. He's always calm when you're here." Elsie smiled faintly. "He's an angel, ma'am. Just needs patience." Janet's gaze softened. "You're a blessing to this house." Truly. The words hit Elsie like a pin through her heart. She wanted to believe them, but deep down, something darker stirred. A voice whispering, "They'll never see you as more than the help." Later that afternoon, Jeffrey returned from his office downtown, tired but proud. The oil market had spiked again, and investors were thrilled. As his driver pulled into the curved driveway, he exhaled, already picturing Janet's smile and Noah's laughter. When he entered, Janet was arranging flowers in the foyer. "How was your day, darling?" she asked. "Lucrative," he said, kissing her cheek. "Texas wants another refinery contract. Looks like Morris Energy will be expanding again." She laughed softly. "And yet you're home in time for dinner. See? Balance." Jeffrey chuckled, removing his jacket. "How's our little man?" "As cheerful as ever. Elsie took him to the garden this morning. He played until he fell asleep under the oak tree." Jeffrey's eyes lit up. "Good girl, that Elsie. We should give her another raise soon. She's earned it." Mrs. Turner, passing by with a tray, muttered under her breath, "Money isn't always what folks need, sir." Jeffrey caught it. "What was that, Mrs. Turner?" "Nothing, sir," she said quickly and hurried off. Jeffrey and Janet exchanged puzzled looks but said nothing more. That night, the mansion glowed with soft amber lights. From her small room in the servants' quarters, Elsie stared out the window, watching the twinkling skyline. In the main house, laughter floated faintly through the open windows. Jeffrey reading Noah a bedtime story, Janet humming along. Her reflection in the glass looked tired, hollow. She touched the faint scar on her wrist, the one from years ago, when life had nearly beaten her to the edge of surrender. "They don't know what it's like," she whispered. "They have everything, and I have nothing." Her eyes darkened. She turned toward the small baby monitor on her desk, the one Janet had given her, so she could keep an ear out for Noah any time. Elsie smirked faintly. "You trust me too much, Mrs. Morris." She walked quietly into the nursery. The nightlight cast soft shadows across the walls painted with stars. Noah stirred in his crib, murmuring in his sleep. "Shuh," she whispered. "Don't wake up now." But her tone was sharp, impatient. The boy whimpered, rolling over. Elsie leaned closer. "Always crying, always needing something." Her jaw tightened. "You don't even know how lucky you are." Then, as if realizing her own reflection in his innocent face, she froze. Tears welled suddenly, anger, guilt, exhaustion tangled together. She backed away, breathing heavily, then turned her eyes toward the corner of the ceiling where a tiny red light blinked from the baby monitor camera. Her lips curved into a strange, quiet smile. "No one's watching now," she whispered. The next morning, the household bustled with activity. Jeffrey was preparing for a week-long trip to San Francisco for an energy summit. Janet helped pack his suits while Elsie carried breakfast trays to the patio. The sun was bright, the air crisp, the kind of California morning that made everything look perfect. "I'll be gone 4 days," Jeffrey said, adjusting his tie. "You'll be all right here?" Janet nodded. "Of course. Elsie and I will manage just fine." Jeffrey smiled, glancing toward the maid setting coffee on the table. "She's reliable. You've got good instincts, January." Janet grinned proudly. "See, my trust isn't misplaced." From across the patio, Elsie looked up and met Jeffrey's gaze for the briefest moment. Her face was calm, polite, but something flickered behind her eyes. A coldness, a secret, and for the first time, Jeffrey felt a faint, inexplicable chill run through him. That evening, when the house grew quiet and Janet was in her study, Mrs. Turner approached the security chief, Mr. Reed, near the side gate. "I don't like it," she whispered. "There's something off about that girl." Reed frowned. "Elsie. She's quiet, but I've seen worse." "No," the cook said firmly. "I've worked for families 40 years. I know what peace feels like in a home, and I know when something dark is brewing." Reed hesitated, glancing toward the mansion's glowing windows. "You think we should say something to Mr. Morris?" Mrs. Turner shook her head slowly. "They wouldn't believe us. Not until they see it with their own eyes." Upstairs, in the dim nursery, Noah's soft cries broke the silence again. Elsie's silhouette moved beside the crib, her hands clenched at her sides. "Stop crying," she muttered under her breath. "Stop crying, please." Her voice cracked, half command, half plea. The child whimpered louder. Elsie pressed her palms over her ears. "Just stop." A loud bang from downstairs startled her. She froze, breathing hard. Then she forced a smile and whispered through clenched teeth. "Good boy. Sleep now." Noah sniffled and quieted. Elsie turned toward the door, her face expressionless. She walked back to her room, unaware that Mrs. Turner, standing halfway up the stairs, had seen the entire moment through the open nursery door. And that was the night Mrs. Turner made up her mind. If the Morrises wouldn't believe words, she'd make sure they saw the truth for themselves. The week began like any other at the Morris mansion, serene, structured, and picture-perfect. Jeffrey Morris had just returned from San Francisco, the trip shorter than expected. His energy conference had ended a day early, and he wanted to surprise his family. It was late afternoon when his Rolls-Royce pulled through the tall iron gates. The fountain glittered under the California sun, the garden manicured to perfection. But as he stepped out of the car, he froze. From somewhere inside the mansion came the sound of crying, sharp, frightened, and unmistakably Noah's. Jeffrey's pulse quickened. He climbed the front steps 2 at a time and pushed open the heavy oak doors. The crying grew louder, echoing from the upstairs nursery. He rushed toward it, his heart pounding. When he reached the door, it was slightly ajar. Through the narrow slit, he saw Elsie bending over the crib. Her face was tight, her voice low and trembling. "I said hush. You hear me? Hush." The boy whimpered harder. Elsie jerked upright, startled, when she sensed Jeffrey's shadow in the doorway. "Oh, Mr. Morris," she stammered, her face instantly softening into a practiced smile. "You scared me, sir." Jeffrey's voice was calm but cold. "What's going on here?" Elsie swallowed. "Noah just missed his nap. He's been cranky all afternoon. You know how toddlers are." He stepped inside slowly, his eyes flicking from Noah's tear-streaked face to Elsie's trembling hands. "You sure about that?" "Yes, sir. Just tired, that's all." Jeffrey crouched beside the crib, brushing a strand of hair from his son's face. Noah's tiny fingers clung to his sleeve like a lifeline. "It's okay, buddy," he whispered. "Daddy's here." Elsie stood silently behind him, her breath uneven. Jeffrey turned to face her again, his tone firm. "Take the rest of the day off, Elsie. Go rest." "Yes, sir," she murmured, bowing her head. As she stepped out, Jeffrey caught the faintest look of resentment flash across her eyes, gone as quickly as it came. That evening, when Janet returned from her charity luncheon, Jeffrey told her what he'd seen. "I don't want to jump to conclusions," he said, pacing the study, but something felt wrong. Her face, her tone, she wasn't herself. Janet frowned, setting down her purse. "Jeff, Elsie's been with us for almost 2 years. You know she adores Noah." "I thought so too," he said slowly. But the boy was terrified. She hesitated, torn between belief and denial. "Maybe she's just exhausted. She's alone with him most days while we're out." Jeffrey's jaw tightened. "That's exactly why we need to be sure." He went silent for a moment, then turned toward the security monitor on his desk. "I want a CCTV camera in her room and the nursery. Discreetly. No one needs to know, not even you until now." Janet's eyes widened. "Jeffrey, you can't spy on her." He looked up sharply. "Janet, this is our child. I'd rather feel guilty for invading privacy than bury our regret later." The silence stretched. Janet finally sighed, nodding reluctantly. "All right, just be careful. I don't want to humiliate her if it's nothing." By the next morning, Mr. Reed, the head of security, had the new cameras installed, small, barely visible, and connected to Jeffrey's private office monitor. The feeds were motion-triggered, recording only when movement occurred. For 2 days, everything seemed normal. Elsie behaved impeccably, singing lullabies, reading Noah picture books, even playing peekaboo. Janet began to relax again, almost embarrassed for doubting her. "See?" she said one evening as they watched Elsie carry Noah to bed through the live feed. "She's wonderful." Jeffrey smiled faintly. "Maybe you're right." But on the 3rd day, everything changed. It began at 10:37 a.m. Jeffrey was in his office downtown when his phone pinged with a live motion alert from the nursery. Out of habit, he clicked it open. The screen showed Elsie pacing the room, muttering under her breath. Noah was sitting quietly in his crib, holding a stuffed bear. "Eat your breakfast." Elsie snapped suddenly, holding up a bowl of oatmeal. Noah shook his head, frightened. She slammed the bowl down on the table, spilling some of it. "You think you can do whatever you want because your mommy loves you so much, huh?" Jeffrey's stomach nodded. He turned up the volume. Elsie's voice trembled as she went on, half angry, half crying. You rich kids don't even know pain. You get everything, toys, hugs, love, while the rest of us scrape for air. Noah started to cry. Elsie grabbed his little wrist too roughly, yanking him toward her. Stop crying. Stop it, she hissed, her voice cracking with something dark and desperate. Jeffrey froze, horrified. For a moment he couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The image burned into him like fire. Then he slammed the laptop shut and grabbed his phone. Read, he barked into the line. I want every second of that footage saved. Now. Yes, sir. That night, Jeffrey returned home early. Janet was in the living room, reading. He didn't say a word, just turned on the television and connected his laptop. Within seconds, the footage appeared on the screen. As soon as the first frame showed Elsie's angry face, Janet's smile faded. Jeffrey, what is this? Watch, he said grimly. They did, every second. Every scream. Every harsh word. Janet's hand covered her mouth as tears streamed down her cheeks. When Elsie's voice cracked. You think you're better than me? Janet whispered. Oh my God, what have we done? When the clip ended, Jeffrey closed the laptop with a trembling hand. The silence that followed was heavier than grief. She was with him every day, Janet whispered. Every single day. Jeffrey stood, his expression a storm of rage and disbelief. I trusted her in our home. With our son. I treated her like family, Janet sobbed. How could she? A faint sound from the hallway interrupted her. Footsteps. They turned to see Elsie, standing awkwardly in the doorway, holding folded laundry. Sir? Ma'am? Did you call me? Jeffrey's eyes burned with fury. Sit down, Elsie. She blinked, confused. Is something wrong? Janet's voice broke. How long, Elsie? How long have you been hurting my baby? Elsie's face went pale. I don't know what you mean. Jeffrey slammed his palm against the table. Don't you dare lie to me. We saw it. Everything. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The air between them thickened with silence. Then Elsie's shoulders slumped, and tears began to stream down her cheeks. I didn't mean to, she whispered. I swear I didn't mean to hurt him. Janet's voice trembled. You called him names. You pulled his arm. You frightened him. Elsie nodded, crying harder now. I know I was wrong. But you don't understand what it's like to live with ghosts. Jeffrey frowned. What ghosts? She looked up, her face twisted in grief. My son. My little Micah. He died when he was 10 months old. I was working double shifts for a family just like this one. Rich, happy, perfect. He got sick, and I wasn't there. I came home too late. Her voice cracked. Every time I saw your boy, his smile, his toys, your kindness, it brought it all back. The pain. The anger. The feeling that the world forgot me. Janet covered her mouth, sobbing. Elsie. I didn't want to hate him, Elsie cried. He's just a baby. But something in me, something broken, took over. I'm so sorry. Jeffrey stared at her for a long time. Then his voice came, low and hard. Sorry doesn't undo what you did. I know, she whispered. If you want to fire me, I understand. If you want to call the police. I already have, Jeffrey said coldly. Elsie's breath caught. Please, sir, don't. Janet stood abruptly, trembling. Do you know what you've done to me? I trusted you with my child. I believed in you. Elsie sank to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. I'm sorry. I swear I'm sorry. But Jeffrey turned away, his voice breaking for the first time. Reed will take you to the gate. You'll wait for the police there. As security escorted her out, Elsie turned one last time. I didn't hate him, she said softly. I hated myself. Then she was gone. Later that night, after the house fell silent, Janet sat in Noah's room, watching him sleep. The soft glow of the baby monitor reflected on her tear-streaked face. Jeffrey stood in the doorway, silent. She was so broken, Janet whispered. Maybe we should have seen it. Jeffrey exhaled heavily. You can't save everyone, January. Some people carry storms you can't calm. She looked up at him. But does that make it right to give up on them? He didn't answer. He only stepped closer, wrapping an arm around her shoulders as she trembled quietly beside Noah's crib. Outside, sirens wailed faintly in the distance, growing louder, closer, until they stopped at the gates of the Morris mansion. The morning after Elsie's arrest, the Morris mansion felt hollow. The once vibrant home, where laughter echoed off marble walls and Noah's tiny footsteps raced through the halls, now pulsed with silence. The air was thick with disbelief, grief, and a tinge of shame. Jeffrey sat in his study, the soft glow of his brass desk lamp casting a weary light on the news headlines splayed across his tablet screen. Oil tycoons made caught abusing child on camera. Beverly Hills billionaire family betrayed by trusted housemaid. Each headline stabbed at his pride. He'd built an empire through trust, trusting engineers to drill safely, managers to handle millions, partners to keep their word. Yet within his own walls, he'd been blind. Janet hadn't spoken much since the police left the previous night. She sat in the nursery, rocking Noah in her arms even after he'd fallen asleep. Her eyes were red, her lips pale. When Jeffrey came in, she didn't look up. "She used to sing to him," Janet murmured, voice trembling. "Every afternoon. I thought she loved him." Jeffrey knelt beside her, his tone gentle but strained. "Some people, they hide pain so deep it poisons everything they touch." Janet glanced at him, her eyes glistening. "Do you think I was wrong to trust her?" He hesitated. "No, Janet. You weren't wrong to believe in goodness. She was wrong for breaking it." But inside, Jeffrey wasn't sure he believed his own words. Within days, the story exploded. Reporters camped outside their gate. Helicopters hovered above the property for exclusive footage. The Morris name, once tied only to oil, energy, and philanthropy, was now tangled with scandal. Jeffrey's PR team advised silence. "The less you say, the better," his lawyer insisted. "Let the footage speak for itself." But silence was not mercy. Online forums buzzed with judgment. Some blamed the Morrises for being negligent, others called Elsie a monster. Janet received hateful comments on her social media pages. "How could you not know?" one message read. "Rich people never notice suffering unless it's their own." She shut down her accounts, withdrew from charity appearances, and avoided calls from friends. Even the mansion's staff seemed uneasy, speaking in whispers, moving more cautiously. It wasn't just Elsie's absence that haunted them. It was the broken trust she left behind. Weeks passed. Elsie remained in custody, refusing interviews. When the Morrises were asked to testify, Janet couldn't bring herself to face her. Jeffrey went alone. He saw her across the courtroom, thinner, paler, her once proud posture bent under invisible weight. She didn't look up as charges were read. When asked if she wished to speak, she said quietly, "No, Your Honor." Her voice, the same voice that used to hum lullabies in their living room, sounded ghostly now. Jeffrey left the courtroom with a strange hollowness. Justice had been served, but satisfaction didn't follow. That night, he stood on the balcony overlooking the city lights of Beverly Hills. Below him, cars snaked through the glowing streets, people rushing, hustling, living. And somewhere out there, a woman who once rocked his son to sleep sat behind cold bars, reliving her choices. He poured himself a drink but didn't touch it. Janet tried to fill the void Elsie left behind. She hired new staff, but the house no longer felt like a home, just a collection of rooms with watchful eyes and distant voices. Mrs. Turner, the cook, often paused mid-task and sighed. "That girl, she had something heavy on her heart," she muttered one afternoon. Janet nodded faintly. "She did. And we missed it." Slowly, Janet began volunteering again. This time not at glamorous fundraisers, but at a rehabilitation center for domestic workers in South LA. The women there shared stories of long hours, cruel employers, and unseen pain. Some had lost their own children to neglect or poverty. One woman, with tired eyes and a trembling voice, said something that stayed with Janet. "Sometimes we break others because no one ever stopped us from being broken." That night, Janet cried for a long time. Not just for her son, or for the trust she lost, but for Elsie too. 3 months later, a letter arrived at the mansion, postmarked from Linwood Women's Correctional Facility. The handwriting was neat but shaky. "Dear Mr. and Mrs. Morris, I don't deserve your attention, but I hope you'll read this. I've had a lot of time to think about Noah, about both of you, and about what I did. I don't expect forgiveness. I only want to say I'm sorry. Not just for what I did to your son, but for how I used your kindness as a place to hide my bitterness. When I came to your house, I was still mourning my own child. He died in a daycare while I was cleaning houses to afford rent. I blamed the world, I blamed wealth, I blamed anyone who smiled while I was still hurting. I see now that my anger turned into cruelty, and I carried that into your home. You were good to me. I see that now. I've joined a therapy group here. I'm learning to face the person I became and the child I lost. I've stopped asking, why did this happen to me? And started asking, what can I do with what's left of me? I will never forget the look on your faces that night. You trusted me, and I broke that. But I hope one day, Noah will grow up knowing that even broken people can find their way back. With remorse. Elsie Peterson. Jeffrey read the letter twice in silence. Janet sat beside him on the couch, hands trembling as she listened. When he finished, the only sound in the room was the faint hum of the baby monitor upstairs. She didn't have to write this, Janet whispered. No, Jeffrey agreed, folding the letter gently. But maybe she needed to. That night, Janet couldn't sleep. She went into Noah's room, where the small CCTV camera still glowed faintly in the corner. It had once been their line of defense, a shield against deceit. Now it was just a silent witness. Noah stirred in his crib, mumbling something in his sleep. Janet stroked his hair softly. You're safe now, baby, she whispered. You're safe. Jeffrey entered quietly behind her. She'll serve 2 years, he said softly. Maybe less if she keeps up with counseling. Janet nodded, her eyes still on Noah. Do you think forgiveness means letting her go? Jeffrey thought for a long moment. No, forgiveness means letting us go from what she did. Janet turned to him, her face illuminated by the nightlight. Then let's forgive her. For our peace. Jeffrey nodded slowly. For our peace. They stood there for a while, the glow of the baby monitor casting gentle shadows on the wall. The same camera that once exposed darkness, now quietly reflecting light. Months later, spring rolled through California. The Morris estate bloomed again. Laughter returned, dinners resumed, and Noah's giggles echoed through the halls. Janet began a foundation, the Open Hands Initiative, to support domestic workers in distress, offering counseling and childcare. When asked by a journalist what inspired it, she simply said, because kindness needs eyes, not just hearts. Jeffrey, too, began changing company policies, ensuring mental health programs for low-income employees across his energy plants. He never mentioned Elsie publicly, but in private, he often reread her letter. One quiet evening, he and Janet sat by the fireplace as Noah played with his toy cars on the rug. Jeffrey looked at his wife, her face calm for the first time in months. Do you ever think about her? He asked. Janet smiled faintly. Sometimes, but not with anger anymore. Outside, the California sunset painted the sky gold and crimson. Inside, peace, fragile but real, settled like dust after a storm. And in Noah's nursery, the small camera light blinked softly. No longer a symbol of fear, but of truth, forgiveness, and the eyes that chose to see again. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, share, and subscribe to Boundless Echoes for more interesting stories. We really appreciate your support. Comment where you are watching from, so we can give you a shout out. See you in our next video.